Earlier this year, In Defense of Christians and the Knights of Columbus joined in partnership to launch the Stop the Christian Genocide campaign, to mobilize the American people in raising a voice of solidarity with Christians in the Middle East. Today's release of the Genocide Report is the fruit of that partnership, for which we are deeply indebted to the leadership of the Knights of Columbus. Carl Anderson is CEO of the Knights of Columbus, and under his leadership, the Knights have taken a leadership role in assisting Christians and other religious minorities who have suffered in the current genocide. To date, they have raised more than $8 million for this cause. They have donated funds to support efforts ranging from general relief to housing, food, clothing, medical care, education, and education for those who are displaced. They've aided IDPs and refugees in Iraq and Syria, as well as those who have fled to Lebanon and Jordan. In addition to these efforts, Mr. Anderson has led the organization to new records in charitable giving each year, with more than $173.5 million and more than 71.5 million hours donated by the Knights of Columbus and its members to charity last year alone. Mr. Anderson serves on several committees at the Vatican and also for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He is also a New York Times best-selling author. He is a former member of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, as well as the former acting director of the White House Office of Public Liaison. Mr. Anderson, on behalf of everyone here and in a very special way on behalf of In Defense of Christians, thank you very much for your leadership on this issue and on this initiative. And I leave you the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion of what has been called the crime of crimes and how genocide is destroying religious minorities in the Middle East. Before I begin, I would like to thank those who have helped us bring this report together, our staff and our team of attorneys, including Professor Robert Destro, the Catholic University of America School of Law, who's here today, and our panelists, many of whom have provided vital support, especially on our efforts to gather evidence abroad, and especially our partner organization in this effort, In Defense of Christians. And by way of some background, in her 2002 book entitled A Problem from Hell, America and the Age of Genocide, the current U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, wrote that the United States has never in its history intervened to stop genocide, and in fact, rarely even made a point of condemning it as it occurred. She documents a long history of American inaction in places like Bosnia, Rwanda, and Cambodia. That situation changed in 2004 as a result of the courageous action of Secretary of State Colin Powell, who became the first member of any United States administration to apply the label genocide to an ongoing conflict when he reported to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that, quote, genocide has been committed in Darfur and that genocide may still be occurring. We now stand on the cusp of another historic decision. Secretary of State Kerry has a similar opportunity to exercise moral leadership. The evidence contained in the report we presented to the State Department yesterday and that we make available to you today fully supports such action. History will record the recent atrocities committed against religious minorities in the Middle East as genocide. The question is whether America will be remembered as courageous, as in the case of Darfur, or as something much less so, as in the case of Rwanda. This is not a case of precipitous action. Indeed, the European Parliament, various national governments, legal experts, religious and civil leaders, and genocide scholars, and candidates of both political parties here in the United States, including former Secretary of State Clinton, all have called what is happening to Christians in the region genocide. So have the 200+ bipartisan members of Congress co-sponsoring the passage of H. Con Res. 75. And today we renew our support for this excellent legislation and applaud its progress in Congress. But what are we to say of the prospect that the U.S. State Department could find itself standing apart from this emerging world and national consensus? Genocide is a crime defined by federal statute and international law. We are asking that Christians be included in a finding of genocide and that arrests be made and in proper cases for indictment of those responsible. This is required when there is probable cause to believe an offense has been committed by the accused parties. Probable cause is a low legal standard. When there is probable cause, the duties of the President and the Secretary of State under 22 U.S.C. 8213 and the Genocide Convention Implementation Act of 1987 require the collection of information regarding incidents that may constitute genocide. And then the President shall consider what actions can be taken to ensure that those who are responsible for genocide are brought to account for such crimes in an appropriately constituted tribunal. The evidence contained in this report, as well as the evidence relied upon by the European Parliament, fully support, and I suggest to you, compel the conclusion that reasonable grounds exist to believe the crime of genocide has been committed against Christians in the region. On December 4th, myself and a number of experts in this area, scholars and religious leaders from around the country, requested a meeting with Secretary Kerry to brief him on the evidence of genocide against Christians and others at the hands of ISIS. While we never received an official response, 4 weeks ago, officials at the Department of State asked us to provide them with a detailed report focused on the genocide question specifically as it relates to Christians. We provided that report to them yesterday, and we present it to you today. I would start by saying that while we believe this to be the most comprehensive report on this subject to date, covering incidents in Syria, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen, however, we continue to receive new reports and new evidence. As comprehensive as this report is, we believe it may only be the tip of the iceberg. Let me give you an example. The media has reported previously on the number of Christian women who have been made slaves of ISIS in Nineveh. Within the past day and a half, we received credible reports indicating that this number is at least 7 times higher than previously thought. Over and over again, we have found that as bad as we know things are and have been, the facts are worse and the atrocities are more numerous. There is only one word that adequately and legally describes what is happening to Christians and other religious minorities in the region, and that word is genocide. The world community has already spoken on this point. Indeed, Secretary of State John Kerry himself in August of 2014 stated, quote, ISIL's campaign of terror against the innocent, including Yazidi and Christian minorities, and its grotesque and targeted acts of violence bear all the warning signs and hallmarks of genocide, unquote. Pope Francis and Cyril, Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, have decried the genocide in these countries against Christians and other religious minorities. Most movingly, and you will hear some of that again today, archbishops and patriarchs of ancient Christian communities in Syria and Iraq have spoken out clearly against this crime and have wept over the blood of their people and ISIS's efforts to rid their homelands forever of Christians. None of these declarations of genocide excluded Christians, who with the other religious minorities in the region have endured targeted attacks at the hands of this radical group and its affiliates because of their religious beliefs. For the United States government to stand alone in denying that this is genocide would be shameful and an abdication not just of leadership, but of cooperation and common sense. ISIS has already also targeted Yazidis and other religious minority groups in a manner consistent with genocide. Thus, our contention is not that Christians should be designated as the sole group facing genocide, but rather that given the overwhelming evidence and the international consensus already existing on this issue, that the United States government should not exclude Christians from such a finding. Doing so simply would be contrary to the facts. The evidence we have presented to the State Department has three major components: an executive summary, a legal brief detailing the case for genocide against Christians, and a substantial addenda, including original source material, reports from NGOs documenting the situation, evidence provided to the European Parliament during their consideration of this issue, lists of atrocities, and similar data. A genocide determination requires two specific aspects. First, intent on the part of those committing genocide and genocidal acts. Both are addressed at length in the attached brief. As in any indictment, a finding of probable cause would allow the State Department to report to Congress that it believes genocide has occurred and to recommend that this be proven conclusively through a court process. Should the State Department not provide the equivalent of an indictment of ISIS genocide, we fear that it will be the State Department itself that will face the indictment of history. Some have argued that the State Department should declare this ethnic or religious cleansing or crimes against humanity, but the former lacks legal standing, legal meaning, and the latter doesn't do justice to the intentional infliction of this slaughter and suffering on these religious minority communities. The word, and the only word for what is happening, is genocide. Additionally, a finding of genocide does not require the killing of the entire group. The words of the UN Convention on Genocide and the US statute based on it are clear that what is required are acts aimed at destroying the group, quote, in whole or in part. Both the drafting history of the Genocide Convention and its application by courts indicate that in part destruction of a group is sufficient for a finding of genocide. Similarly, there is ample precedent for finding that forced deportation, often in concert with killing, rape, and other forms of violence, qualifies as genocide. As to the issue of intent, it should be noted that individual accounts, the collective evidence, and ISIS' own public statements make clear that it targets Christians in order to destroy Christianity in the lands that they control. ISIS magazine is named Dabiq, the place ISIS believes it will win its decisive battle against what it describes as the army of Rome. It routinely refers to Dabiq as the place where it will destroy, quote, the Crusader army, an unmistakable Christian reference. The magazine last year published a picture of Pope Francis, captioning him as the Crusader Pope. Dabiq proclaims the intention of ISIS to destroy Christians. And I just will quote part of a quote, but won't dignify the quote by reading it in its entirety. You can see it in the report. "We will conquer your Rome, break your crosses, and enslave your women. If we do not reach that time, then our children and grandchildren will reach it, and they will sell your sons as slaves at the slave market." Elsewhere, Dabiq states the intention of ISIS to target Christians. A video released just last month by ISIS in Libya states that its adherents should fight and kill them, from their great priest to the most pathetic one. A second speaker calls for Egyptians to terrorize the Jews and burn the slaves of the cross. Statements by ISIS related to the beheading of the Coptic Christians branded Christians as polytheists for their belief in the Trinity, making Christians the same as pagans in their view. Such statements, especially in context, establish a clear intent to destroy Christians as a group and Christianity as a religion. Consistent with these threats have been the actions of ISIS. Our recent fact-finding mission to Iraq found evidence of rape, kidnapping, forced conversions, and murder. In addition, we uncovered evidence of widespread property confiscation and forced expulsion. Almost every incident we discovered has not been previously reported. What is publicly known and what our investigation uncovered is substantial, but it is clear that what is contained in our report represents, as I said earlier, only the tip of the iceberg. We are now being sent new evidence daily. So what is known about the genocidal atrocities of ISIS will only increase in the days ahead. Those we interviewed showed great strength, and some showed great heroism. There was Kalia, a woman in her 50s who was captured and held hostage along with 47 others. During her 15 days in captivity, she endured demands to convert to Islam with a gun put to her head and at times a sword to her throat. She resisted ISIS militants who attempted to rape girls among the hostages and later attempted to take a 9-year-old girl as a bride. While 14 men in the group eventually gave in to the demands that they convert to Islam, Kalia never did. Ultimately, she was left in the desert to walk to Erbil. Others in Kurdistan affirmed without prompting that she had saved many people. Like the Yazidis, Christian women face sexual slavery, a main tool of the caliphate uses to recruit young men and to exterminate religious groups. Now an infamous ISIS slave menu lists the prices by age for Christian or Yazidi women on sale in their slave markets. It's contained in our report. The murder of Christians is commonplace. Many have been killed in front of their own families. The Syriac Catholic Patriarch of Antioch, Ignatius Joseph III Yunnan, many of whose flock lived on the Nineveh plain or in Syria, reports that 500 people were killed by ISIS during the takeover of Mosul. In Syria, where the organization Aid to the Church in Need has reported on mass graves of Christians. Patriarch Yunnan estimates the number of Christians targeted and killed by Islamic terrorist bands at over 1,000. Melkite Catholic Archbishop Jean-Clement Jean-Bart of Aleppo estimates the number of Christians kidnapped and or killed in his city in the hundreds, and as many as thousands killed throughout Syria. In Nineveh, many more were taken hostage, seemingly at random, or as hostages in exchange for their families' freedom. Many of those hostages have now disappeared. And even before ISIS was formally constituted, Christians found themselves victims of its predecessors, the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Now, some argue that Christians should be excluded from a genocide declaration on the theory that ISIS supposedly allows Christians to pay jizya, a tax historically made available in Islam to Christians in Muslim lands, while denying this option to groups like the Yazidis, who are considered pagans by Islam. But this theory, I repeat, theory, is without foundation. The premise is false because ISIS cannot be trusted to apply jizya as historically understood. And as applied by ISIS, jizya is almost always a term for extortion and a prelude or a postscript to ISIS violence against Christians. In Nineveh, demands for the so-called jizya payment was a prelude to killings, kidnappings, rapes, and the dispossession of the Christian population. Not surprisingly, the Christian negotiator, Father Emmanuel Adelkello, and the other Christians saw this, quote, as a ploy from which ISIS could keep the Christians there to further take advantage of them and abuse them. In Raqqa, jizya was offered only after ISIS had already closed the churches, burned Bibles, and kidnapped the town's priests. Little wonder that Middle East scholar and until recently a coordinator of the U.S. government ideological counterterrorism messaging, Alberto Fernandez found ISIS jizya to be, quote, more a publicity stunt than a careful recreation of jizya as practiced by the early caliphs. Furthermore, self-styled ISIS Caliph Abu Omar al-Baghdadi has admitted for nearly a decade that Christians no longer qualify for the historic protection offered by Islamic law. And under his leadership, during the Islamic State's attack on Our Lady of Salvation Church in Baghdad in 2010, quote, the gunmen made at least 4 claims justifying their killings at the church, 2 general and 2 specific, including the claims that 1, all Christians were infidels, and 2, it is permitted under Islamic law to kill them. Our interest in the issue of genocide comes from our humanitarian concern for those suffering people and for their spiritual and physical well-being. The Knights of Columbus became involved in supporting Christian and other religious minorities in this region because of the long-standing humanitarian activity and support for religious freedom at home and around the world. Beginning in 2014, the organization began raising money for refugee relief in the Middle East, and these funds have helped Christian as well as Yazidi and Muslim individuals and families. We've been providing funding for general relief in Aleppo, education for refugees now living in Jordan, and food, clothing, and shelter, education and medical care in Kurdistan. One of the clinics we fund in Dohuk have been visited by Yazidi women who recently escaped ISIS sexual slavery. To date, the Knights of Columbus has raised more than $8 million in this cause. So, it is for these reasons that we have partnered with In Defense of Christians in producing this report and in sponsoring a national television advertising campaign in support of the petition located at stopthechristiangenocide.com. It is our hope that together our efforts will help mobilize greater public opinion and governmental action to protect these innocent religious minorities, including Christians, in the Middle East, and to help ease their suffering. A declaration of genocide by the United States government is a key component of this protection. Thank you very much.
Good evening, all, and thanks to the Knights of Columbus and IDC for leading this initiative. We're here to speak about an issue of human right and human dignity and the sanctity of life, regardless of creed, regardless of color, regardless of nationality. And so if we are going to decree an act of genocide, it must be on the facts alone and not on those suffering. If we look at Article 2 of the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, we find that these acts fall very much in line with the requirements. And I draw your attention to the report, and the picture on the report carries 21 of our own people who were butchered relentlessly in Libya. They were not killed for any other reason but that they were Christians. And that was targeted, it was intentional. Ladies and gentlemen, if Christians are excluded from the classification of genocide, my concern, my fear, my expectation is that we will be responsible for a greater and more ruthless campaign of persecution against them, not only in that country, but in the region. Because people on the ground, regardless of what we say in terms of rhetoric, in terms of stipulation, and in terms of convention, people will see that the international community has supported one group against another, and they will see that other as fair game. And of course, how do we not do that if they are suffering the same fate at the same time at the hand of the same perpetrators under the same conditions? For us, it is important to call for the safeguarding of all life, regardless of who they are. And that's a message that needs to be clear. We are not sectarian here, we're not tribal. We are calling for a general message that targets intentional persecution. What's happening in the Middle East and in Syria is criminal and is an indictment of our humanity if left unaddressed. And so therefore, we must look at it and look at what we can do. Whether speaking of Yazidis, Christians, or other communities, these atrocities they face are deplorable and warrant not only our concern, but our intentional action. The path of genocide is not lain overnight. This has happened over decades. And what we've seen is an ongoing persecution that has led to a desensitization that has led to a systematic acceptance of that diminished state as the status quo. And because it was the status quo, limits were then pushed, and we are where we are today. These are atrocities not only against international convention, but against a God-given right for people to live free, safe, and dignified. Inaction is inexcusable, and it will lead to a further persecution, not only of Christians, but of others. It has also led to an unprecedented displacement of people, and the refugee crisis that we're seeing, and having been to Erbil myself, having been to Jordan last week in the Zaatari camp, having been to the transit camps in Europe, I see the direct effects of that. Finally, in declaring genocide, we're not looking to do much except to address and flag up the unbearable suffering of communities and subsequently work for the safeguarding of God-given rights enshrined in universal and international law. We are not looking just to do a statistical process, but to safeguard safety and not mere protection, prosperity and not mere charity, and dignity and not mere survival.
Thank you, Your Grace. Next, we will hear from Dr. Gregory Stanton, founding president of Genocide Watch.
I come here as president of Genocide Watch, but also as the former president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. And that organization, a number of members of that organization, over 50 of them, immediately signed a letter to all members of Congress back in September of 2015, calling upon Congress to recognize that genocide is and was being committed by ISIS against, and I'm listing these groups, Chaldean, Assyrian, Melkite, Greek, and Coptic Christians, Yazidis, Shia Muslims, Sunni Kurds, and other religious groups. The organization, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, has now taken that up as an official resolution of the organization. And the question that I want to simply address this morning is, what difference does it make that we call it genocide instead of crimes against humanity? As a genocide scholar, one could say, well, the Genocide Convention actually doesn't compel us legally to do anything except to pass a law in our own country against genocide and to extradite people who have committed the crime. Legally, in other words, it really doesn't make a difference if we call it genocide. But the truth is, the word moral force, the words moral force, is the reason for this word to be used. Because the word genocide, which was invented by Raphael Lemkin, because he realized that the other terms simply don't pack the moral clout that we need to describe genocide, words like extermination, barbarism, and so forth. We needed a new word, and that's why he invented the word genocide, which applies solely to human groups. And the question is, what difference has it made now historically since the Genocide Convention was passed by the United Nations in 1948? It has been applied very seldom since then. But I can tell you, because I worked in the State Department with the very legal advisors department, that is, I was not in the legal advisors department. I was a person who wrote UN resolutions in the International Organizations Bureau. And I had to deal with the Rwandan genocide. And what I realized is that the denial of genocide by our legal advisor's office during that genocide, the Rwandan genocide, is one of the great moments of shame of our State Department. For 3 months, we denied that that was genocide because the legal advisor's office wouldn't let us use the word. I fought that, I want to tell you. But because I knew it was genocide, everybody else knew it was genocide. Just the way this one is clearly genocide. So why are we waiting to use the word? I'll tell you why. Because the word packs moral force, and it requires action. And what we have here is a case where the administration is not ready to make the determination because it is not determined to do what is necessary to really stop ISIS with the full force that it needs to do. Now, we are taking action, of course, and some people say, well, isn't that enough? Well, I don't think it is. So the question is, historically, when has it made a difference? The first example I will give you is the Bosnian genocide, in which the Srebrenica massacre, July 11th through 13th of 1995, immediately provoked NATO to have a conference in which they said, this is genocide. Within a month and a half, NATO was bombing Serbia and was bombing the Bosnian Serbs, and that stopped the Bosnian War. It brought Milosevic to the table in Dayton, and that, in other words, that made a huge difference. Instead of calling it ethnic cleansing, it was called genocide, and it made a difference. In the other case that I know of is Kosovo, where David Sheffer, a dear friend, our U.S. War Crimes Ambassador, went to the border with Macedonia, and I told him before he went, you've got to use the G word, David, and he said, you know, 10,000 people have been killed. I'm going to get criticized a lot for that, because a lot of people think you have to have more than that. And I said, well, you and I both know as international lawyers, you don't have to have more than that. So he did. He used the G word. He called it genocide. He called it precursors of genocide. Within a few days, we were bombing the Serb forces in Kosovo, and that, in turn, that saved hundreds of thousands of lives in Kosovo. The negative cases, where we in fact called it genocide, in Darfur, for example, a really good case in this instance because it was preceded by the kind of careful study that needs to be done. In this case, if the State Department is not convinced by our evidence, by gosh, I don't see how they couldn't be. But if they aren't, they should appoint a commission like they did in Darfur to investigate. And the other case that I know is Rwanda. Do we, in fact, want to be the people who have to answer people like the woman who came up to me in Rwanda in 1994 and asked me, why did you abandon us? That's the same question that I was asked in Cambodia in 1980. Why did you abandon us? I don't want to have to answer that question again. Why did you abandon us?
Thank you, Dr. Stanton. Next, we have Father Douglas Albazi from the Marelia Refugee Center in Ankara, Erbil, Iraq.
Good morning, everyone. When people ask me from where you are, when I say I'm from Iraq, actually, all the world, they told me how's life is there. The only one just asked me, the American, we are sorry what we did in your country. So how is the life there in Iraq? Actually, the easy answer is there are no life in Iraq for my group. I'm not talking about actually the last 2 years happened to my people when Islamic State took over Mosul. I'm talking about that my people actually been attacked just last 100 years, 8 times, and nobody knows about that. That's why they call my church the Church of Martyrs or the Church of Blood. I do respect the people, they try to find a word, like doctor said, but I'm always disagree with him. I'm always telling doctor, genocide is a polite word. Can you figure another word actually to be fit what happened to my people? We are in Iraq, my people, faced with the last generation, with the third generation of the radical. The first generation of radical is Al-Qaeda, second, Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, the third one now is Bakr al-Baghdadi. I'm afraid from the fourth one. I know it's been pain, and just to be, we are not talking about persecution and just like stories. If we are talking about stories, we have thousands and thousands. Myself, I throw out many bad experience in my life, but I'm still lucky to talk about it. My church in Baghdad being blown out up in front of me. I survived it twice. They bombed my car. I got shot in my leg by AK-47. My church been attacked by 5 missiles. And after I been kidnapped for 9 days, they used the hammer to break my teeth, my nose, and my back. And I spent years, not pain of body, but you understand which pain I suffered. And I still keep my shirt when they kidnap me. And still I look to my blood every day. And I remember. And this is what happened even to my people every day. I'm lucky. I'm still look to my blood and remember. But what about my people? They don't have any chance more to talk about our stories. Why I am here? I am here to tell you that my people, they feel that we are forgotten and we are alone. And I am here to tell the American, the first right step should be taken is to call it a genocide. If we are not declare that it's a genocide, that means we are not saying the truth. My people need a future, looking for a future, and live in peace and free. So I'm begging begging to people of America to recognize it as a genocide. In my country, before 4,000 years, we create the law, the code, by the king named Hammurabi. After 4,000 years, there are no such law protect my people. I know that the Christian in Iraq, we are not just for good days, but also for bad days. But it seems that the bad day is not going to be finished. Can you help us to finish? Thank you very much.
Next, we have Father Denka Jula, who's also a priest in the Archdiocese of Erbil, Iraq.
I am going to talk about some of numbers about my people today, but my people are not numbers, they are people. We Christians of Iraq, nearly 2 million just a decade ago, are now reduced to less than 300,000. And what becomes of these remaining Christians will be decided based upon the actions the world and the US will take now. Just imagine with me, if the case continues for the next 5 years, what will happen? We are going to disappear. Since 2014, the Islamic State took Mosul with all the Nineveh plain in one day. The people of 17 Christian villages escaped. In that time, my diocese received in my town over 13,000 families. All of them were without shelter, and until now, we have 3,000 to 5,000 families who left Iraq to the Middle East country like Turkey and Jordan and Lebanon. Those families, all of them suffered from the mental harm and serious bodily harm. Thousands of people lost everything. When you see your people killed, taken hostage, raped, the history of the people destroyed, their heritage and their culture wiped away and chased across the land, and then you see their prison destroyed, their houses stolen, and forced them to flee to another land and live as homeless IDPs between different cities and cultures, then, my dear friend, you have seen the reality of the Christian of Iraq today. If this is not genocide, then truly this word has no moral or legal meaning. The result today forced my people to live in different society with many challenges: income, privacy, education. This is in itself a genocide. When a crisis starts, we don't focus to their stories and they don't try to tell their stories. First, they are just trying to survive. I won't mention that when Mr. Scott coming from Knights of Columbus to Erbil before 2 weeks. We just looking to the stories and to see the people. They just now, after 1 year and 6 months and more, they just now start to tell us on stories. Before, no one speak about the stories. And also there is cultural reason, especially linked to the abduction of girls and forced change of religion. My people consider that is a shame. For that reason, no one talk about this. Like Almas, she is in Baghdad now. She was kidnapped by Islamic State, ISIS, and was raped, and now she is get a psychosocial supporting. And we have Rana. Rana, she is with her husband. Her husband kidnapped, and he is disappeared now. And Rana, she is get like a slave or wife, I don't know, by one. He is Amir. Amir, that means the princess of ISIS in Mosul, and no one now understand where is she. For that reason, we have many hidden stories. Finally, today, in the age of technology and in the third millennium, we have no excuse to repeat last century's many attacks on my people. If are you going to take 100 years or maybe 100 months to call what happened to my people is genocide, at that time, you will not find anyone of my people left. Thank you.
Next, it's our pleasure to introduce Johnny Moore, who is the author of the book Defying ISIS.
On Friday, jihadists invaded a home for the elderly in Yemen. They killed 16 people and kidnapped a priest. 4 of those they killed were nuns from the Order of Mother Teresa. They were missionaries of charity. They handcuffed the women before they shot them in the head. This was on Friday. And do you know why they did it? Because they believed that they could. They believed they could get away with it. They believed that no one would hold them to account, and the truth that we must face today under present circumstances is that they might actually be right. For Christian persecution is now viral. We now live in a world where Mother Teresa herself would fear for her life. Every jihadist in the Middle East believes they can kill, kidnap, enslave, and otherwise torture Christians and other religious minorities, and they believe they can do it without repercussions. And if they aren't allowed to do that, as we've heard here today, they are more than happy to drive them and to chase them and to chase them and to chase them till they have no home to live in. The fact is that the slow response of our national leaders to this crisis has made it worse, and it continues to make it worse. And I believe inaction or slow action is actually an action, if not complicity. I'll never forget my own conversation with a dear Catholic sister in Iraq just weeks after ISIS took Mosul. She said to me, "I love America. It's a beautiful country with wonderful people. I have a doctorate degree from an American university." The nun said, "You take care of your pets so well." She said, "When will you take care of your brothers and your sisters in Christ? Why are you so silent in the face of our genocide?" What would President Obama and Secretary Kerry tell that dear sister today based upon the encyclopedic evidence released in today's report? The United States is better than this. So let us call it what it is. It is genocide. What will we tell our children if we don't? What will Secretary Kerry tell his own if he doesn't? And yet what you've seen here also today is a glimmer of hope. Because if we act fast enough, the faith of those who remain is unwavering. All you have to do is go to Ankawa in Erbil on the night of the cross, as I have. I was just there the last one. And you'll see the crosses over the city illuminated on the tops of churches and on the temporary tents and caravans where people are living. For those who remain with a type of unwavering resilience and apostolic faith that is only galvanized by their persecution. They are willing to die for their faith, the faith that many of us struggle to live. They might have lost everything material in the world because of their faith, but they still have hope, and they await our help. But we mustn't delay. And so today, from this city of great power and of great historic kindness, I join with the cacophony of voices here and ask President Obama and Secretary Kerry to send a clear message to these dear people, these victims of genocide. You have not been forgotten, and help is on the way. But I also find ultimate hope in the words of the Apostle Paul in Romans 16:20. Soon the God of peace will crush Satan underneath our feet.
Thank you. I want to commend Carl Anderson and the Knights of Columbus for this incredible compilation. It really is the largest compilation existent of what has happened to the Christians in the path of ISIS. And it shows that as many Christians have been killed by ISIS as any other group, that this is irrefutable evidence that this is genocide, and they're still compiling it. And yes, emphatically, the Yazidis, the Mandeans, the ethnic Shia, other groups over there are also facing the same thing. ISIS wants to destroy them all. Secretary Kerry, since October, has been leaking, his department has been leaking that they are willing to designate that the Yazidis are victims of genocide, but not the Christians or any other group. They have been saying that they don't have any information. They just don't have the facts. Carl Anderson, as well as a group of us, signed a letter on December 4th, everyone from Cardinal Wuerl to the Center for American Progress expert, saying, please, will you meet with us so that we can brief you about what is happening to these groups in the Caliphate, in the Islamic State. We got no response at all, none whatsoever. In recent weeks, the State Department has sent delegations to various Christian leaders saying they want to make a deal. They want to make some kind of wordsmithing deal. We're not going to call it genocide. We don't have the facts. What else can we call it? Can we call it crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing? No, these words will not do because they do not indicate that there is an intent to destroy the Christians or these other groups. This was a genocide when ISIS went into Nineveh in the summer of 2014, and it continues to be a genocide throughout the Middle East, as we've been just talking about this morning. We're still finding out about new cases. The Syriac Catholic Bishop Moshe in northern Iraq told us this week that he has tried to redeem for $30,000 a 3-year-old girl, Christina Noah, who was snatched from her mother when they were left behind because the father was blind when ISIS came in. There's a price list for Christians and Yazidis. 1 to 7-year-old girls are priced at $200. This is issued by ISIS's own Treasury Department and has been validated by the UN's Secretary General's special representative. But ISIS has not responded to that, so Christina is still somewhere lost, disappeared, enslaved. I was talking to Cardinal McCarrick this week. He was just in the last month in a refugee camp in Iraq, and he was in Kurdistan, and talked to one woman there who said that she witnessed ISIS crucify her husband to the door of their home. So these are the kinds of cases that are probably not even in this report yet. Actually, there are no churches open in ISIS territory. There are no priests or clergy in ISIS territory. There are hardly any Christians in ISIS territory. The dozens or hundreds that are there are hostages, they're prisoners, they're slaves. There is no normal functioning Christian community intact in ISIS territory. Secretary Kerry's, well, the question then becomes why? Why does Secretary Kerry resist calling this a genocide? And unbelievably, there's indications that the State Department believes that Christians are respected by ISIS as people of the book. If you look at the State Department's Religious Freedom Report for 2015, they say Christians were offered jizya options by ISIS. Jizya is a traditional Islamic arrangement for having Jews and Christians pay a tax. In exchange, they get protection for their life and their wealth, but also the right to their rights, R-I-T-E-S, the right to worship. There is no right to worship under ISIS. Any payments are extortion, or it's ransom. This is not respect. This is genocidal activity. Ambassador Samantha Power literally wrote the book on U.S. policy and genocide. And it's full of anguish about the failure of U.S. government to act during past genocides. So where is her voice now? She's now in the government. She's a member of the cabinet. Why, Ambassador Power, please speak up. Please end the silence. Please do not use the U.S. veto in the Security Council when the EU Parliament brings this before you. It is time, for the sake of decency, for the sake of justice, to call this what it is, genocide. Thank you.
We also have with us Juliana Taimoorazy, the founder of the Iraqi Christian Relief Council.
Honored members of clergy, dear colleagues, dear friends, good morning. I'm an Assyrian Catholic and I'm a former refugee. I escaped Iran due to religious harassment in 1989, a proud US citizen. The Philos Project, Iraqi Christian Relief Council, American Mesopotamian Organization, and Assyrian Aid Society just submitted a letter to the US Department of State making the legal case for genocide. We have been joined by Knights of Columbus, 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative, and IDC making similar cases. But ultimately, this is not a legal discussion. It's a human discussion. And as an Assyrian Christian who just returned from northern Iraq just 2 weeks ago, along with the Philos Project, I'd like to spend a few moments talking about what genocide, that is the intentional destruction of an entire people, looks like from ground up. Bodies are broken, family members killed, survivors sick and suffering, husbands watching their wives die of cancer because they have been reduced to poverty and they're too poor to buy medicine. Spirits are shattered, lost everything they have worked for their entire lives. Homeland overrun, future grim. Families are wrecked, death and immigration, depression. 2 weeks ago in Iraq, I met a little girl, only 3 years old, who was picked up and thrown against the wall, and she no longer can speak. Where is her father? Murdered because he was a Christian. Culture is being erased. St. Elijah's Monastery stood tall on the hill near the northern city of Mosul for 1,400 years. Today, this holy place has joined a growing list of ancient sites such as Monastery of St. Behnam, Mar Behnam, Tomb of Jonah, the great cities of Numrud and Khorsabad, Lamassu, our winged bull, all have been obliterated. Genocide is not just a legal term. It is not a legal category. It is a systematic elimination of an entire nation. In this case, a nation that has existed for over 7,000 years, a nation that was among the first nations to convert to Christianity through St. Thomas the Apostle 2,000 years ago. I call upon the State Department to recognize this profound injustice as genocide. Secretary Kerry, if this fails, my Assyrian nation, these Christians, will no longer exist. They will be erased in front of our eyes. Our ancient Assyrian Aramaic language, also known as language of Jesus, will be erased and will not be heard. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Kerry, it is our moral obligation as Americans, and it is in our interest as a free people to stop this destruction before it is too late. Thank you.
I'll be very brief. I think we did enough writing in the report to keep you busy. I just wanted to say a couple of things about the legal issues. Lawyers get paid to help their clients do right and to defend them when they do wrong. Mary McLeod is the legal advisor at the State Department. She's making her client look cruel, heartless, and clueless. She's not serving her client well. When the judgment of history comes, she's going to be one of the targets. And I rarely would ever talk as a legal ethics professor about the job that another lawyer is doing, but Secretary Kerry can't hide behind her. What we have is a case of genocide denial here. It's happened in the 30s, it happened in Rwanda, it happened in Darfur, it happened in Cambodia. How long is it going to take for the lawyers to get the message? Thank you.
On behalf of the board and staff of In Defense of Christians, I would like to thank Supreme Knight Carl Anderson and the Knights of Columbus for their invaluable leadership on this issue and this project. Christians in the Middle East are facing a crisis, the scale of which puts their very existence as a culture and community in the region in the balance. The solidarity with the Knights of Columbus have shouldered to come to their aid is a vital sign of unity between Christians around the world and goodness of the human spirit to come to aid our brothers and sisters in need. IDC could never have realized this work on its own, and we are indebted to the leadership of the Knights of Columbus for partnering with us to make this movement a reality. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, and the incredible dedicated team of the Knights of Columbus. I would also like to extend my gratitude to all the contributors of today's brief, which were many across the spectrum of organizations, some of whom represented here today. Finally, I extend my deepest gratitude to all of our esteemed panelists in today's event, whose tireless commitment to this cause has brought them here today to share with us their time, energy, expertise toward the cause of the protection and preservation of Christianity in the Middle East. Thank you for your attendance.